Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for your attending this session. My name is Robert Greenhill, Chief Business Officer and Managing Director of the World Economic Forum. And we have in front of you a fantastic panel to discuss a very broad issue, which is, with all the changes that are taking place, the massive economic changes, the shift to emerging markets, the technological changes and the impact it's having on industry after industry, the digitization of much of the economy, the changing expectations of the roles, the values, the behaviors that should be expected of corporations coming out of the financial crisis. What is the corporation in the 21st century? What should its goal be? What should its successful business model be economically? What should its successful business or social model be from a broader social perspective, so that it continues to actually have the social license to operate? A big global issue, and with that we have some big global thinkers from literally around the world. And what I'd like to do is to invite each of them to provide some opening comments and thoughts, have a bit of a conversation here, and then we'll open it up to questions and comments from the floor. And with no further ado, let me start with our first speaker, Cynthia Carroll, CEO of Anglo American, great friend of the forum, and a great leader in her industry, but also for her continent. Cynthia, how are you thinking about the corporation in the 21st century?
Thank you very much, Robert. And this is obviously a very big topic to be covering in a couple of minutes, but if I could just sum it up in one word, it would be accountability. Today, we're rightly accountable to a far wider range of stakeholders. And not so many years ago, the mining industry saw itself as having two principal constituencies, its shareholders and the governments in the countries in which it operated. Today, it's a very different situation. Local communities, NGOs, employees, suppliers, customers are all prominent stakeholders in all of our businesses, and want to have a say in how our business is conducted. It's a far more joined up business today than it ever has been before. And obviously the strength of the internet and the media has a lot to do with that. And although the extractive industries may have been a bit slow in responding to all of this, certainly those of us who lead the major mining companies appreciate all too well that today we're operating in a very different world in terms of accountability. And that means we need to forge multi-stakeholder partnerships. And increasingly, as easy to find deposits become exhausted, the mining industry is having to search further afield. And this can mean that we are operating in countries where governance is weak, with a history of civil strife or political instability. In such areas, voluntary initiatives like the UN Global Compact, which China was one of the first countries to support, or the voluntary principles on security and human rights, set not just high standards, but are also the key to being able to do business. And in a very real sense, ours now is a world of international codes of practice and soft law, and of universal standards that need to be applied everywhere where we operate, and if we are to meet society's ever-growing expectations of how a business should behave. To succeed in this new world, mining companies need to be accepted and they need to be trusted by governments, but also critically by our communities. And without the support of local society and the ability to forge sustainable partnerships across a broad spectrum of constituencies, we won't be able to mine successfully and we won't be able to generate profits for our shareholders. But what does that mean in practical terms? And how do we manage our impact on society? Business is not government, and we don't seek to take the role of government. But where a multinational company like Anglo American has a major presence in the developing countries, we have a responsibility towards our workforce and towards the local community. And often that means that we do have to support in terms of the local needs as far as health care, as far as education, as far as infrastructure, to name a few. And of course, jobs. And Anglo American has long believed that procurement is one of the strongest tools in economic development, of bringing new entrepreneurs into the business mainstream. And in South Africa, in 1988, we started an enterprise development initiative called Anglo Zimele, which means to stand on your own 2 feet. Now, 22 years later, Zimele is supporting 13,000 jobs in hundreds of small businesses operated by Black entrepreneurs. And through Anglo Zimele, Anglo American provides finance in the forms of loans and equity stakes, coaching, mentoring, training, advice on how to get access to supply chains and to win tenders on a competitive basis. And last year, Zimele helped to procure over $2 billion of goods and services by businesses with significant Black ownership. About 40% of our overall spend now is in South Africa, and we've now rolled this initiative out in other countries, including Chile, Brazil, Venezuela, Peru, where we are supporting another 5,000 jobs. And more recently, we committed under the United Nations call to action to create an additional 15,000 jobs by 2015. And I'm proud to say that Anglo is the first and only mining company to have made that commitment to the United Nations under its call to action. And if there were more time, I could talk more about our pioneering work around HIV/AIDS as one other example, what we're doing in recycling water, saving water, recirculating water, maintaining water qualities, and other initiatives around energy conservation and carbon reductions. But in this brief outline, I've deliberately not done, what I've not done is to give you a list of risks facing the major corporations in the 20th century. But all I can think of are many examples, including nationalization, including environmental disasters, increasing tax regimes to corporate takeovers. So what I can say, though, is that one of the firmest defenses against risk is to build sustainable relationships across the range of constituencies involved. And today, no major mining project is likely to get the go-ahead, or should it, without the agreement of so many stakeholders. So it is our duty, and therefore as CEOs, to lead and to manage the process so that we have an enduring license to operate. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Cynthia. I mean, I really take away the ABCs of the corporation, the 21st century. The A's got to be accountability, leading to acceptability and agreement. Now, when we look about the issue of fragility, strife, changing partnerships and alliances, I mean, that sounds a lot like an academic institution. So for that reason, but also in terms of your great engagement as one of the leading thinkers on the role of the corporation, Tarun Khanna of Harvard Business School. I'm very pleased to turn it to you for your perspective as to the role of the corporation in the 21st century.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you, Cynthia, for those introductory comments. I'll just make a couple of simple points. The first, building very much on what Cynthia just said, the role of the corporation cannot be divorced from the society in which it operates. The functions that a corporation does, even if you think of it as primarily responsible to its historical stakeholders, let's say just the shareholders, it would still be in its best interest to serve and perform other functions, such as the ones that Cynthia is articulating. As a simple example, it makes a lot of sense for Anglo American, just to stick with that example, to do something about HIV/AIDS in South Africa, given the context in which it operates. Not even going down the road of the moral responsibilities and ethical needs that Anglo should be sensitive to. Examples of this abound. If you go to the developing world, it's pretty prosaic to observe, as many of my panelists will support me, that you have to get involved in worker training. In the United States, it's not clear that you do need to do it, but when the specialist institutions that you need to perform worker training are missing, it becomes in your own parochial self-interest to do so. And I think simply observing that that's the case and recognizing that the appropriate roles, the appropriate boundaries for a corporation are very much a function of the milieu in which it finds itself is an important starting point for us.
Yeah.
That's sort of the first point that I would make. The second is to perhaps amplify a point that Cynthia was making earlier, which is she started off by saying, if you'll allow me to keep building on you, I think it's easier to have a conversation than to make a separate speech. You started off saying that you used to be primarily sensitive to shareholders and governments. And now you've realized in the new complicated world that we operate in that there are many different stakeholders that we have to work with. I think if you take the perspective of many companies around the world, take a software company, Vineet might speak to this in a few minutes. There are many industries around the world where people have not had to historically deal primarily with governments. But they are also finding that they now have to engage with the state. The state itself is a resurgent actor. So I think the general version of what Cynthia was saying is that it used to be the case that it was fine to carry on business as usual by dealing with stakeholder A or B or C. And that somehow, that convenient partitioning of who you have to engage with seems to have dissolved. And we are in a world where exactly this kind of forum is even more meaningful, where you do have different confluences and different influences coming together, not just from different parts of the world, but from different strata of society. And I think the role of the corporation is to appreciate that it's at the nexus of many of these different forces and to parse that. Of course, it makes life more complicated, but perhaps more interesting. Stop with that.
Well, an excellent point, Tarun. I mean, this challenge of a CEO, in addition to what they have to do in running their business in a traditional way, understanding in a more complete way the interaction with other actors of society seems to be a real challenge. In fact, I've heard the comment be used as the modern CEO needs to be a triathlete. They need to actually compete not only in the business world, they also need to be able to interact with government, and they need to interact with civil society. And I think anyone who's done the triathlon knows being an Ironman is even more difficult than being a marathon runner. And that's the challenge. Let me actually, because you asked Vineet, let me just switch the sequence a bit. And Vineet Nayar, you have been in charge of HCL, a leader in thinking about innovative models about how you organize and run your corporation. But I know you're doing that in response to your thinking about the changing context. How are you thinking about this issue of the 21st century corporation?
So let's start with thinking about what is different. And because we are a software company, as Tarun rightly said, we see that digitization of economy and its impact far more significantly than I think a lot of others are seeing. The concept of distance, space, time, markets, price, value are dramatically changing. That's the first impact we'd have to deal with on 21st century. The balance of power and the global economy is shifting towards the BRIC countries, plus US, which will be amongst the top 5 in GDP growth by 2050. So that's the second shift we'll have to take care of. The urbanization and the 1.5 million people every week who are moving towards urban cities is the third challenge we will have to deal with. The middle class population of 70 million a year is getting added to middle class is the fourth challenge in the 21st century we have to deal with. And environmental issues, we talked a bit about this, but I think water and the scarcity of water and the people who are stressed around water is going to be the fifth amongst the many other challenges we're going to deal with. I would believe that the impact this would create for corporations are easier to handle because it will create new business models. The humans would have to come back into business because the only way you are going to solve these challenges is through innovation. And the only way you can get innovation moving is by putting human beings back in business, by enthusing, encouraging, enabling them to create the value rather than using them as human resources. I hate the word human resources as if it's minerals and human resources will appear in a line item. And I think you will also see the emergence of new leaders, new thinking, new ways of management. But overall, I believe that the 21st century problems will be converted into opportunities by corporations, or at least some of them, and we will be able to deal with them, and we will be able to grow because of the changing times and sand. What I worry about is in the confluence of the society, the government, and the business, which is what Cynthia and Tarun was referring to, is how would we encourage a shift of value and shift of behavior in that interface. How would we incentivize all three of them to work collaboratively? Who would fund that incentive? And most importantly, from my perspective, who would be the first mover? We have seen a lot of talk here, right? And we have also seen some actions which have been originated, some by government in some cases, some by business, some by society. But these are isolated instances. And I think that the challenge we have faced is significantly larger for a new structure, new economic structure, new incentive structure to come into place so that it can be implemented right across the world. In absence of these answers, structured answers to these questions, what I fear is that the businesses will create a larger divide between them and the society compared to what we see today, which will put higher stress on social balance, which we can anyway see stressed in some countries like India, like China, now in the US. You're already seeing that structure being stressed. And therefore, while we see the 21st century as a great opportunity of moving things, we also have to be conscious of the great problems it focuses on, which will need structural answers to be addressed.
That's a great point. And this issue of creating
vấn đề làm thế nào để mà có thể có được các hoạt động, và đồng thời các kỳ ở đây ai sẽ là người đầu tiên chuẩn bị để có thể đưa ra các cái mô hình mới, đưa ra những cái vấn đề thách thức ở đây. Có lẽ là chúng ta đã có những cái lời khuyên tốt đối với nhau. Đây tôi nghĩ rằng là cái mà gì chính phủ cần làm, và vấn đề ở chỗ là ai sẽ là cái người bước đầu. Vâng, xin mời tiếp theo. Có lẽ là ông đã nghe tất cả các cái ý kiến của mọi người đây. Vì với tư cách Nhật Bản ở đây, các cái kinh nghiệm cũng như các cái thách thức, ông có thể chia sẻ được không? Các cái mô hình, và trước hết, cái đề tài này dường như là rất là rộng rãi, rất là lớn. Tôi nghĩ rằng là tôi không thể bổ sung thêm gì đây, nhưng mà cái môi trường xung quanh các cái doanh nghiệp là rất là thay đổi rất nhiều hàng ngày. Ví dụ như là vốn, đây rồi là các vấn không phải riêng Trung Quốc mà ở đây kể cả bên Hoa Kỳ nữa, chính phủ cũng là cái người chủ lớn nhất của tất cả những cái tài sản bất động sản, và cũng như là bên Nhật Bản thôi. Và ngày càng rất là phức tạp, có rất nhiều người ta nói rằng là và chúng ta sẽ phải giải quyết tất cả các cái gọi là các đối tác, cơ quan tham gia, và các cái vấn đề cũng rất là phức tạp so với, và vấn đề chỗ là hợp tác với nhau để làm sao tạo ra là sự hợp tác, và làm sao các cái mô hình này sẽ là động lực cho sự phát triển, và phải là tạo ra cái sự sáng tạo. Tôi nghĩ rằng để mà có thể hợp tác, làm nào để mà năng động, có thể có rất là nhiều các cái hình thức khác nhau. Ví dụ như là tôi làm kinh doanh ở Nhật Bản, tôi thấy rằng là Nhật Bản là một chúng ta phải tìm làm sao các cái thị trường mở rộng, ví dụ như là Trung Quốc hoặc các nơi khác nữa. Và để có thể làm được việc đấy, chúng ta sẽ phải làm thì chúng ta phải có các cái vốn, và làm sao tìm được các thị trường tốt hơn để tạo thuận lợi. Tôi ngồi ở đây, có lẽ chúng ta sẽ phải cũng phải trả thuế, cũng phải làm tất cả các cái thủ tục, và tất cả những các cái điều đó đều là phải các quyết định của các cái doanh nghiệp cạnh tranh với nhau trong các cái bối cảnh như vậy, để làm sao có thể có được lợi nhuận nhiều nhất. Và tôi nghĩ rằng bởi vì là với cái tình hình như vậy thì các cái doanh nghiệp cũng rất là cần có các cái hợp tác khác nhau nữa.
nations. We need to be able to communicate more with the nations as well. But at the end, I think if we try to define what is a 21st cooperation, I think that is too much. I think we should give a lot of freedom to different corporations. We can see any different type of corporations in 21st century. But only one important thing is the corporation's influence to the people or society is so big, so that the corporation needs to disclose information, needs to communicate well what they are trying to do. So that is really what 21st century corporation need to do. But I don't think there's any one type of, model what the corporation should be.
Very interesting. So in fact, there may be very fluid approaches in the next while. And the point you're making of there's this relationship between the corporation and the society or the country, but actually, as it's increasingly globalized, it may need to understand how to have that simultaneously with various different places in terms of paying taxes and engagement with society. Well, we've been talking a lot about the fact that there's a globalization taking place with new technologies, emergence of BRICS, obviously incredibly important, the emergence of China. Captain Wei, I think, in many ways, Costco represents China as a globalizer, and you actually represent this new model of Chinese leadership, not only responsible for Chinese employees, but thousands of others, and actually being engaged not just with the rest of the world in China, but actually with the rest of the world around the world. How do you see the challenge of rethinking the role of the corporation and rethinking the role of the Chinese corporation in the 21st century?
Thank you, Robert. I just heard the 4 panelists speak. It's a very good point of view. I agree with them. 我的观点在重新思考21世纪
Well, in rethinking companies in the 21st century, we need to innovate. As a business leader, you have to think about how we shall be doing our business in a sustainable way in the 21st century. I have 4 viewpoints to offer for your reference. First, for a modern company in the 21st century, they should be more adaptive. Economic globalization is quickening and speeding up with synchronous economic developments across many countries. Therefore, there are 3 characteristics in the modern-day economic world. First, more frequent changes. Second, greater cyclical natures. And the third, greater fluctuations. So only those companies who can take preemptive actions and who are reactive enough and flexible enough to changes will be able to survive and prosper in a sustainable way. And second, for companies in the 21st century, they should be better at consolidation. Modern industries have pushed forward the specialization of companies, the division of labor amongst the different companies. A company should concentrate on its core competencies. However, in the 21st century, for large companies, especially mega companies, they should not only be specialized, but also good at consolidating different parts of the business. It should be good at its own industry and should also be able to acquire a bargaining chip in the entire value chain surrounding its business. And thirdly, the social dimensions of business are of vital importance to the viability of a company in the future. Many companies regard CSR as soft advertising. But that's not the case. In the case of the BP oil leakage, the market value of its stock dropped by 55% in its worst time and established a $22.5 billion US compensation fund to pay for the damages. And Costco has been a leader in corporate social responsibility in China, and is also an exemplary model internationally speaking. For Chinese companies to go to other countries, it must merge itself into the local communities. It should carry out communication, and it should always be seeking win-win results while delivering upon social responsibilities. In the case of the tsunami, a number of years ago, On the very morning, Costco donated 10 million RMB yuan to China Red Cross to be sent to the tsunami devastated countries in Southeast Asia. Immediately after the earthquake in Sichuan the year before last, we at the first instance donated 100 million RMB yuan. And for the Yushu Qinghai earthquake this year, we donated 10 million RMB yuan. And for the drought in southwestern China, we donated 10 million RMB yuan for the first batch of donation to respond to our premier's call that we should leave nobody thirsty in the disaster area. And in June last year, when the Madoff fraud took place, thanks to our credibility and integrity, Costco won the 2009 Credibility and Integrity Award in Hong Kong, recognizing our corporate governance capabilities and integrity and best practices and the code of conduct. So the global financial crisis originated in the subprime mortgage loan crisis in the United States. It could be attributed to a very large part to a lack of integrity on the part of some businesses. When they were making a loss, they were falsifying their accounts to allure more people into buying their stocks, such as in the case of Madoff. So in rethinking companies in the 21st century, companies must be honest, and integrity is always of vital importance. It's as precious as gold. It's more precious than gold. And also the corporate culture, especially that of MNCs, is going to have a large impact on the national cultures or even international cultures. In different countries, Costco is adapting ourselves to different customs and cultures and traditions. And at the same time, our corporate culture, in a step-by-step way, is impacting the local culture. For example, in the year 2001, at the invitation of the governor of Massachusetts, at that time, I share with you the background. Most other seafaring companies were leaving Boston, and 9,000 jobs were at stake. And the governor of Massachusetts asked me to start up an itinerary from China to Boston. Then I agreed. I made the decision to secure the jobs of 9,000 people. But at the negotiations, I raised a condition. I'm here to create more jobs, to make your port more energetic. But I don't want to see your workers staging strikes on my ships. Then they made a commitment on the part of ILA to me that our workers will never stage any strikes on board Costco vessels. So from 2001 till today, that commitment has always been kept. There's never been a strike on board Costco vessels. That's how our culture impacting local culture in a subtle way. And also, earlier this year, we launched a bid for the Terminal 2 of another port, and I was asked to revise the colonial clause. And PSA, Hutchison, Whampoa, and many others, Maersk and Costco joined the bid. In the public tendering, I won the bid. Why is there a colonial clause? There's no way. Otherwise, the Greek government will lose your credibility. Then the Prime Minister, Mr. Papandreou of Greece, conveyed the message to me that Captain Wei is reasonable. The Greek government should never ask for the revising of the terms.
Then I signed a new contract with my workers. And I told them that the reason for us to be there is to increase the local employment I chose Greece as an offsite port and transport Chinese goods to Greece so that Greece can become a portal to the rest of the European Union countries. That's a good thing for Greece. And then later on, Greece suffered from a range of strikes, including nationwide strikes and port worker strikes, but my workers never took on strikes. The first thing for our investment there was to bring benefits to local workers and local public. That's the responsibility for a company in the 21st century. While going global, we're also transferring our culture to the rest of the world. We have over 5,000 overseas employees, and we have an annual reward for the outstanding workers. And whatever their gender or their nationality is, I invite those most excellent workers to China for site tours. That gives them great pride. So for a company in the 21st century, it has to take on more responsibilities. A company must take pride in the win-win result process, and a company must deliver a global compact. As Costco is an excellent member of Global Compact, I was invited by the UN Secretary General and delivered a speech in Geneva. On the annual sustainability report, Costco was ranked as the best example in Asia. Therefore, right here at this meeting, I was delivering my perspectives for your reference. Thank you.
Well, that's great. I don't know how you say tour de force in Chinese, but that was a fantastic view from, I think, the new generation of Chinese globalizers. I mean, when listening to this, you can see both the complexity and the challenges, but the excitement of what this new world offers, and the way in which organizations will have to respond. And I was trying to note and synthesize it to the ABC element, because we started with this issue of accountability leading to acceptance, and this issue of bridging across the three divides of civil society, government, and business. And who's going to build that bridge? But the C to me was clearly, after hearing Vineet, was this issue of creativity, but I actually think it's got to be culture as well, in terms of what is the core element of the culture of the organization that transcends different national or other boundaries over time. So a fascinating context. Before we open it up to the floor, any comments? Tarun, any observations that you have from what you've heard so far?
I mean, just a couple of synthetic points, I think, that occur to me. Matsumoto-san said, you know, even though he has, as a Japanese company traded on the Tokyo Stock Exchange, he's got certain responsibilities to Japan. But at the same token, as a steward of the company, he has a responsibility to be in the best place that serves the company. And sometimes the incentives are not quite aligned to do the right thing for a particular context as opposed to the shareholders. And I think that's where the leaders of tomorrow will be tested. Now, what if Governor Swift turns to Captain Wei tomorrow, or then Governor Swift in Massachusetts, and promises him that there will be no strike? But in fact, the local unions decide that they want to strike. So she's torn then. I'm simply playing with your example. She's torn between responding to the electoral needs of Mr. Romney or whoever else she's responding to at the time. I may have this inaccurate, but whatever her political predispositions are, and her promise that she made to Captain Wei. Yeah. And my observation is that as much as we have in this room represented probably a selection of companies that see themselves as good stewards of the world economy, that there have been times in history when multinationals have also tended to be footloose and fancy-free, and you know, are equally likely to walk away from particular commitments. And the challenge for us, I think, is how do we bind them to commitments without destroying shareholder value, and make sure that we deal intelligently and creatively with some of these conflicts that might arise, such as the one that Matsumoto-san alluded to, in effect, in his comments. And I think that's going to be the tricky part going forward.
let me just raise that point and this issue. We didn't hear the word, or I didn't hear the word shareholder once. And yet this is in a period of shareholder activism with quarterly results. How do you bridge the complex and sophisticated conversation we just had with the next quarter?
I think there is a stranglehold of shareholders on business, and most of the boardrooms are being run, have been run by the shareholders, and the domination of shareholders is the cause of the problem we are seeing, where the balance with the other stakeholders, which is the employees and the society and the customers, is not really balanced. That's one of the problems. However, I would extend on what Tarun is saying and say that the shareholders of the governments are also keeping the governments on hostage situation. So you see a lot of populist reactions in US, and you see a lot of populist reactions everywhere, which is not necessarily, it's populist for a purpose, as shareholders are very populist for a purpose in the way they run their company. And I think that's the added complexity to this, because the center of everything is a human brain, right? Whether he is part of a society, part of the government, and part of the business. And as of today, all these are not converging in thoughts. They may converge in vocabulary, as he said that CSR is a brochureware for a lot of companies. He's absolutely right. In terms of they are not converging in action. We have significant challenges. Governments have to be re-elected every 5 years, and they will do what's good for them. Mm-hmm. Businesses have to declare quarterly results. They will do what's good for them. And societies are going to get trapped in middle on governments on one side and business on the other side. And that's the reason I would say that there's a structural flaw in this thinking. So unless we rethink the structural flaw, today the way we are thinking is let the business behave socially responsible. So Costco may be a unique example that they're behaving socially responsible, but there are so many others who are not. And we're leaving to the governments to behave socially responsible. Some governments are, but today increasingly more and more governments are behaving populist. Even those people who were sensible are taking decisions which don't seem that sensible. So when we move towards 21st century, we understand the opportunities, but I see the tension between the business and the government, with society in between, only widening, and I have not heard any solution in our conversations here. All we are saying is, me as business, we are doing this, we as society are doing this, but I'm still not seeing enough research or enough work being done on how we're going to fit this together and how the incentives or all these three people are going to align in their action. They may have different points of view, but how would they align in action so that as a society we don't break up, which is my biggest fear of 21st century.
Cynthia, I know you've
if I could just get back to the question of the reaction of the shareholders, the issue of license to operate, and to your point about binding multinationals or even much smaller companies to social responsibility investments and ensuring that they stick to their promises. If I could just use the example of safety to expose what certainly the approach that we've had and maybe get to those points. In 2007, it was clear for us that we were not making great strides in terms of fundamentally shifting the culture internally, and we were having fatality after fatality, and this has gone on for years. It was a decision that I took in June of 2007 when we had yet another fatality in a deep-level platinum mine in South Africa to shut down the mine and bring 28,000 people up out of the ground. Now, I didn't ask anybody. We didn't give that a lot of thought. We didn't debate. We took that decision understanding that there had to be a fundamental shift in protection of our total employee base. We were going to do things completely differently. And the outcome of that, I would have to say, was not any pushback from shareholders. We lost thousands and thousands of ounces of platinum, which equated to hundreds of millions of dollars for the year. But it did shift the paradigm entirely. And as a result of that, getting back to how do you bind others to their commitments and change the way they think about their cultures and cooperation and community engagement and protection of their employees, we also realized, as it related directly to safety, that we couldn't do it on our own. And we reached out to the union, to the labor representatives, and we reached out to the government. And we expressed to them that we needed to fundamentally change the standards, uplift the standards, and we would be the first one to help to do that and expose our own history and where we were aiming. And as a result, we can say that our number of fatalities have dropped about 60% over the last couple of years. Injuries have come down by over 70%, and it has had a knock-on effect in terms of injuries in South Africa, and I would even suggest more broadly across the industry. So I think it takes that engagement, it takes that understanding of what's doable, of what's reasonable, of where we need to be aiming, and it takes the support of a much broader reach of stakeholders than what we've engaged with in the past.
Now, we only have a few minutes, but I know there was a lot of interest in the audience. Let me ask people if they have a specific question on some of these issues, the how-tos, or a specific comment. But if I could ask you to keep it to 30 seconds, because what I'd like to do is get 2 or 3, and then give the panelists a chance to answer these questions, plus any closing comments. Because then at about 10 minutes to the hour, we have another exciting element that we want to talk about as well. It's very connected about 21st century models. Please. Arthur, here.
Mutambara from Zimbabwe. One of the key things that has to be done differently is to do strategy differently. What can be done to make sure that CSR, safety, the environment are embedded in strategy? In other words, they're not nice to have, but they're part of strategy. Can you get some examples of how we embed CSR, how we embed the environment into company strategy?
Great, thank you very much. Other, at the back, gentlemen at the very back.
Yeah, in 30 seconds, I just want to emphasize that I represent a global trade union. I want to assure you that the trade union movement is more than prepared to work closely with the management in creating the ideal corporates in the 21st century. And definitely, we are capable of keeping our commitment. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, sir. And right beside you at the back, there's...
Hi, I'm Marjorie Krause, APCO Worldwide. A lot of the things that were mentioned take a long-term view, and there's a lot of pressure on CEOs with tenure on short-term results, and I just wondered how the leadership that you provide, how much pressure you have, and what advice you have for other CEOs who are trying to balance those two things.
That's great. 3 fantastic interventions, issue short-term versus long-term. Question of how do you really build in CSR and engagement so it's not a nice to have at the end, but also the offer of strategic engagement from other partners in society. Let me turn it over for each of you to make any comments on those and any other comments you'd like to make, because we're now in the last 5 minutes. Who would like to start with that? Captain Wei, can I invite you?
Margaret, it's a good question for that. 作为一个企业的 CEO,
As a CEO, you've got to strike a balance between short-term imperatives and long-term strategies in order to maximize returns for shareholders. There should be some short-term interest, short-term considerations, otherwise there's no dividend. But if there's wrong strategy for the long term, the company will go bankrupt. The company itself is going to fail. Therefore, there's got to be a balance between short-term and long-term interests and imperatives. And only being able to do that defines what a good CEO is all about.
Oh, okay. Regarding shareholder, I believe the stakeholders are generally very powerless. Say I'm drinking water, and you never know if this is really, purified, water. You have to believe in what the company says. you're working in a company, and the employee would never know what the company overall really does. And shareholders too, the minority shareholders have no impact, no influence to the company, although it is taking exactly the same risk-return characteristics as large shareholder has got. So I believe all stakeholders are generally very powerless, but only one exception is a large shareholder. And I think because stakeholders are very powerless, the CEO needs to control himself or herself, and the CEO has to have a very, constructive long-term vision. But again, only large shareholder can distract that kind of activities. So I think to create or to maintain the good relationship with large shareholder, or to break all large shareholder system is quite important. So in that sense, I have a general suspect in state capitalism, and I don't think it is going to bring corporations into the optimal, place.
Very interesting.
I think the question on what can we do on the short term and how can we put CSR as part of the business, I have two perspectives on this. First is I truly believe that you have to start the change at home and start the change by looking at the way you're treating your employees. And we heard the Costco examples where he's putting employees at the center of his strategy and the continuity of the employees. I think how many corporations are run in democratic fashion and how many corporations are run in autocratic fashion. So before you go out and try to change the society, let's first start with our employees. That's the first immediate action. Second is I think the mandating and more and more governments are thinking about it, the declaration of your CSR initiative and your sustainability initiative as part of the balance sheet, as part of stock market declaration, is going to be a positive step towards making sure that you're dealing with businesses which are socially responsible rather than businesses which are not socially responsible. I think the third issue is in terms of the RTI Act in India, which is right to information, has made governments a lot more accountable to their spend towards social initiatives, because there's a lot of tax we pay, and therefore there's a lot we contribute towards social change. With those kind of initiatives in a lot of other developing countries where citizens have right to information on where the spend is going, I think we'll create larger transparency and the alignment between business, society, and governments will increase.
Thank you. Cynthia?
Just coming back to what I said earlier and the point about strategy, for us, corporate responsibility is embedded in our strategy. So it does come back again to license to operate. If we are not reaching out with communities, if we're not aware and mindful of expectations of the NGOs, of municipal expectations of demand, of what the union environment is all about and how we work hand to hand to achieve success together, we will not get there. And so, I mean, it's a core value for us to embed it in everything that we do, and we share that as well with our shareholders. They understand that Anglo-American is part of our equation. It's what makes us successful, and from my way of thinking, what is going to make us the leading global mining company. I just also say, I mean, we're not holding back on investment in any given year. Last year we spent $86 million in social investment over and above $51 million the year before. So despite the economic downturn, despite some of the pressures that we're under to do other things, we continue to grow in that area, and we will continue.
That's great. Tarun?
Just one observation in response to the gentleman from Zimbabwe about embedding CSR. I guess my observation would be that the companies that are fairly selective about which CSR projects to pick, in particular with a view to finding ways of making them self-sustaining, which in turn I feel has something to do with using each of those initiatives to spur entrepreneurship in and of itself. In other words, to make the CSR have a life of its own. Those seem to me to have the longest, the greatest longevity, and that might be a design consideration in some sense, being selective to picking what you get engaged in.
Right, Captain Wei.
In striking the balance between short-term and long-term imperatives, I would like to give you an example. Out of the global financial crisis, I would like to urge all our customers to rethink who is your true partner as an ocean shipping company or supplier. Who is your true revenue and bottom line contributors out of your customer base? During the financial crisis, some shipping companies simply walked away, leaving their customers stranded without being taken care of. And during the financial crisis, many customers in turn ignored their signed contracts with the shipping companies. So in order to cater to short-term interests, they destroyed their integrity and credibility. And then they have begun to suffer in the post-crisis era. In the post-crisis era, many customers have turned to me. I want to work with Costco. And for example, your group, the Anglo-American Resources Group, your CEO approached me in a conference at Diaoyutai in Beijing. They would like to regard us as a long-term partner, as a long-term shipping service provider. If you fail to implement or honor your commitments during the crisis, then after the crisis, your customers will walk away from you, or your suppliers will walk away from you. So rethinking a 21st century company, we must give integrity paramount importance.
Well, listen, thank you. That has been a fantastic review of the situation, and I've been doing my ABC list again, and the only element I think that we'd have to add on the C, in addition to the question of creativity and culture, is also conviction. And we've seen that in spades from the speakers here. So let me thank the speakers for a wonderful event. But let me invite you to stay, for in terms of this issue of 21st century organizations, we've been talking about 21st century corporations, but we'd now like to spend another few minutes celebrating the other element of a 21st century organization on the social side, which are the social entrepreneurs, which are moving beyond the issue of simply philanthropy to actual engagement. And we have Hilde Schwab here, the co-founder of the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship, to present 3 awards to some of the exciting global leaders in this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. As a matter of fact, we will be talking about one of the stakeholders you have mentioned, civil society, but a very particular group of people in civil society, the social entrepreneurs. They also have created organizations, but with a social purpose as first goal. Their common goal is to find solutions for apparently unsurmountable problems in the world. With their pragmatic approach, they find sustainable ways of tackling issues in the fields of health, education, water and sanitation, agriculture, environment. They bring ultimately innovative business models and solutions and partnership models to social challenges. With the rapid rise of economic development in Asia, there is also a growing gap between the rich and the poor. Social entrepreneurs play a critical role to ensure that the poor are not left behind, but they are integrated into the process of development. Over the last decade, the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship has been selecting leading social entrepreneurs in many countries and regions. Today, there are nearly 200 social entrepreneurs in our community. And we are proud now to present the 3 Asian winners who will join this distinguished group in 2010. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you the winners of the Asian 2010 Social Entrepreneur of the Year Award in Asia. We start with Gemma Bulas. Would you please come up? Gemma Bulos is from the Philippines. She has created an organization called A Single Drop for Safe Water. The United Nations estimates that 1.2 billion people in the world lack access to fresh water, and 3 to 5 million people die of water-related diseases per year. The Philippines are one of the most disaster-prone regions, and access to clean drinking water and sanitation is crucial for survival. A Single Drop for Safe Water works with communities and local governments units to identify needs and benefits for improved water and sanitations, as well as to build the capacity of government and community service suppliers to implement solutions that meet their needs. Gemma, congratulations for what you're doing. Thank you. Andy Schroeter. Andy Schroeter is working in Laos. He has created the Sanlabob Renewable Energy. In Laos, 40% of the households today do not have access to electricity. Sanlabob brings renewable energy to such areas by installing central solar charging stations, solar home systems, and hybrid village grids through public-private partnerships. To encourage local enterprise development and ownership, Sanlabob also trains village technicians to maintain solar stations and recharge and rent out solar lanterns to replace the harmful kerosene lamps. Sanlabob has installed more than 4 hybrid grids and 5,500 home systems in over 90 villages in Laos. 1,200 households are using their solar lanterns. Those numbers have been rapidly increased as Sanlabob expands internationally into Uganda, Cambodia, and Afghanistan through franchise agreements. Andy, congratulations. Sakina Jacobi. Sakina from Afghanistan. She has created the Afghan Institute of Learning. During more than 3 decades of war and civil strife, Afghans have experienced constant disruptions in daily life. 2 basic human rights, education and health, are missing to restore a stable society. Currently, only 28% of the adult population can read and write. The average life expectancy is 44 years, while the infant mortality rate is the 2nd highest in the world. Since 1996, the Afghan Institute of Learning has been providing health and education services to women and children. They operate rural health clinics, provide primary and secondary education, university classes, as well as teacher training and human rights workshops, altogether benefiting more than 7.7 million people to date. Through these common efforts, the Afghan people have a chance to rebuild their identities, their lives, their society, and ultimately their country. Sakina, thank you to have come here under the difficult circumstances. Thank you for your support for these great people who really are out to change the world.
Thank you.